The rain was heavy, turning the road into thick brown mud. Eric Adiambo was halfway across the street when a black luxury car suddenly sped up. The driver saw her. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He swerved on purpose. Mud exploded into the air, soaking her face, her clothes, her hair. Laughter came from inside the car as it disappeared into the rain. Eric stood there trembling, eyes lowered, fists clenched. What the man in that car didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated was no longer the woman he once threw away. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories of karma, pain, and redemption move your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Long before the rain, before the mud, before the black luxury car, Eric Adiambo was a woman who believed marriage was something you protected even when it hurt. She had met Beatrice Adiambo when she was 24, young enough to think love could fix everything, old enough to ignore the warnings in her chest. Beatrice was charming in public, sharp-tongued in private, and obsessed with how the world saw him. He dressed well, spoke loudly, and walked as if the ground owed him respect. Eric was the opposite. Quiet, soft-spoken, raised by a mother who taught her that endurance was a virtue and humility a shield. She worked long hours in small shops, sometimes cleaning, sometimes selling, sometimes doing whatever paid that day. Her hands were rough, her back often sore, but her eyes still held hope. At first, Beatrice liked that about her. She's simple, he had told his friends. No drama, no demands. What he really meant was no power. Their wedding was small, too small for Beatrice's taste. His mother, Mama Ruth Adiambo, never hid her disappointment. On the day she met Eric, she looked her up and down and asked only one question. "What does your family own?" Eric smiled politely. "We own each other." Mama Ruth's lips tightened. That was the first warning Eric ignored. The first year of marriage was tolerable. Not happy, just survivable. Beatrice worked irregular jobs, always talking about big plans that never seemed to start. Eric worked more to cover the gaps. She cooked, she cleaned, she waited. When bills came late, Beatrice blamed her. If you were smarter, you'd be earning more. When friends visited, he corrected her in front of them. "Don't talk like that. You sound uneducated." At night, when Eric cried quietly on her side of the bed, Beatrice turned his back to her. Slowly, almost carefully, he began to shrink her. He hated the way she dressed too cheap. He hated the way she spoke too soft. He hated the way people assumed she was just his wife. One evening after a friend's birthday party, Beatrice snapped. "Do you know how embarrassing it is?" he said, pulling off his jacket to walk into a room with a woman who looks like she just came from the market. Eric stared at him. "I came straight from work." "Exactly," he replied. That's the problem. That night something inside her cracked, not loudly, quietly, like glass under water. The emotional distance soon turned into something colder. Beatrice stopped coming home on time, sometimes not at all. When Eric asked, he laughed. "Must I report my movements to you?" Whispers followed. Neighbors talked. Friends avoided eye contact. Eric knew before she had proof. Women always do. One afternoon, while cleaning his trousers, she found a lipstick stain. Bright red, confident, nothing like her muted colors. She held the fabric in her hands for a long time. When Beatrice came home, she said nothing. She just placed the trousers on the table. He didn't deny it. Instead, he scoffed. So. Her voice shook. "I'm your wife." And he replied, "Look at you. Look at her. Men don't stay hungry when food is everywhere." That sentence would echo in her mind for years. From that day, the humiliation became public. Beatrice brought the other woman, later known as Lydia, into conversations, into laughter, into comparison. "At least she understands class," he would say. Mama Ruth noticed the change and approved of it. "That's what happens when a man outgrows a woman," she told Eric bluntly. "You should be grateful he married you at all." Eric swallowed her pride daily. She told herself marriage required sacrifice. She told herself patience would be rewarded. She told herself God was watching. But God was also silent. The breaking point came on a night much like the one in The Hook, rainy, cold, unforgiving. Beatrice came home late, drunk on arrogance, smelling of another woman's perfume. Eric stood by the door, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said. He laughed. "About what? Your poverty." Something inside her snapped, not into anger but clarity. "I can't live like this," she whispered. "I'm still your wife." Beatrice's eyes hardened. He looked around the small living room at the cheap furniture, the peeling paint, the life he had grown to resent. "Then leave," he said. She froze. "What I said, leave," he repeated louder now. "Pack your things and go back to wherever you came from." Rain thundered outside as if echoing the command. Mama Ruth appeared in the doorway of her room. She didn't intervene. She nodded. Eric packed one small bag, clothes, a photo of her late mother, nothing else. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I loved you," she said. Beatrice didn't answer. He was already on his phone. Eric stepped into the rain with nowhere to go. That night, as she walked through dark streets with water soaking her shoes, she didn't know she was walking out of a life that would break her, and toward one that would remake her entirely. The rain did not stop that night. Neither did the pain. Eric Adiambo walked until her legs ached and her chest felt too tight to breathe. Every step splashed water onto her worn shoes, but she didn't slow down. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the way Beatrice had said, "Leave," as if she were nothing more than dust to be swept away. By the time she reached the edge of the neighborhood, the streets were nearly empty. Shops were closed, doors were locked, even the strayed dogs had found shelter. Eric stood under a flickering streetlight, clutching her small bag, suddenly realizing the truth she had avoided all night. She was homeless. For the first time since her mother's death years earlier, Eric felt completely alone. Not just lonely, but unclaimed by the world. She thought of calling someone, anyone, but who her relatives had warned her against the marriage. Friends had drifted away when her life became too quiet, too small, too embarrassing to invite into theirs. So she kept walking. By morning, she found herself sitting on the steps of a closed church, soaked, exhausted, numb. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Crying required energy she no longer had. When the sun finally rose, it did not bring warmth, only clarity. Beatrice was done with her, and worse, he was relieved. Across town, Beatrice slept soundly. Lydia lay beside him, her manicured hand resting on his chest. When she stirred and asked casually, "What about your wife?" he laughed. "She made her choice," he said. "I chose peace." That same morning, Mama Ruth visited him. "She's gone?" she asked, sipping tea. "Yes," Mama Ruth nodded approvingly. "Good. A woman like that would have dragged you backward forever." Not once did either of them ask where Eric had gone. Back on the street, hunger arrived quietly. Eric spent the morning walking from place to place asking for work, cleaning, selling, anything. Most people barely looked at her. By noon, her hands were shaking. That was when she heard a familiar voice. "Eric." She turned slowly. It was Amina Okoye. Amina had been her friend years ago before marriage swallowed Eric's life whole. She looked the same as ever, plain clothes, warm eyes, strength in her posture. "What happened to you?" Amina asked gently. Eric opened her mouth to answer and collapsed instead. When she woke up, she was lying on a thin mattress in a tiny room. The smell of cooking beans filled the air. Amina sat beside her. "You fainted," she said. "You're lucky I passed by." Eric tried to sit up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Amina raised a hand. "Stop. Eat first." As Eric swallowed the first warm spoonful, something broke. Tears finally came, messy, uncontrollable, humiliating. She cried for the marriage she gave everything to. She cried for the years she lost shrinking herself. She cried for the silence that followed her pain. Amina listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. When Eric finished, Amina said only one thing. "You can stay." Those words saved her life. The days that followed were not easy. Amina lived in a cramped single room herself, barely making enough from tailoring jobs to survive. But she shared everything she had. They slept head to toe. They rationed food. They laughed sometimes, mostly at their own stubbornness. But the city was cruel to women with no protection. Eric faced rejection daily. Employers looked at her worn clothes and tired eyes and decided she was a liability. Some men offered help that came with conditions. One afternoon, after a particularly degrading encounter, Eric returned to the room and sat silently. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to survive out here." Amina looked at her carefully. "You survived Beatrice. This is easier than that." Eric didn't answer. But something inside her shifted. She began taking any work she could find, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes, carrying boxes at open markets. The work was brutal, but each coin she earned felt different. It was hers. One evening, after weeks of exhaustion, Eric sat alone outside a small roadside restaurant waiting for leftover food Amina had promised to bring later. An old man struggled to stand nearby, His walking stick slipped and he nearly fell. Without thinking, Eric rushed forward and steadied him. "Careful," she said softly. The man looked at her closely. He was well dressed but tired, his eyes sharp beneath age and weariness. "Thank you," he said. "Most people don't notice anymore." Eric smiled faintly. "I know the feeling." They talked briefly, nothing important. The weather, the city, hard times. Before leaving, the man paused. "What do you do, young woman?" Eric hesitated, then answered honestly, "Whatever I can." He nodded thoughtfully. "My name is Joseph Mwangi," he said. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." She didn't think much of it. Why would she? People like him didn't return to people like her, but fate was already watching. That night, as Eric lay beside Amina staring at the ceiling, she felt something unfamiliar beneath the fear and hunger. Resolve. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she promised herself one thing. She would never beg Beatrice for mercy. She would never return to that house. And one day, somehow, the world would be forced to see her. Life in the slums did not break Eric Adhiambo all at once. It tried to wear her down slowly. Every morning began before sunrise. Eric and Amina would wake to the sound of roosters shouting, vendors, and the low hum of generators struggling to stay alive. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Water had to be fetched. Food had to be earned daily. Nothing was guaranteed. Some days Eric found work. Other days she returned with empty hands and heavier thoughts. At night, when the city finally quieted, doubt crept in. What if Beatrice was right? What if I really am nothing without him? Those thoughts scared her more than hunger. One afternoon, while scrubbing floors at a small office building, Eric overheard two women talking. "Did you hear Beatrice Adhiambo bought a new car?" "Yes. And he married that classy woman Lydia." Eric's hands froze in the soapy water. The words stung, but they also hardened something inside her. Beatrice was moving on loudly and proudly while she fought for survival in silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. "I hate him," she finally whispered to Amina. Amina turned to her. "No, you hate the way he made you feel." Eric nodded. Tears rolled into her hair. "I feel invisible." Amina reached for her hand. "Then we make you visible." The next weeks were a test of endurance. Eric began working longer hours. She saved every coin, no matter how small. She stopped waiting for sympathy and started watching people, how they talked, how they sold, how they negotiated. She learned quickly. At the market, she noticed which vendors attracted customers and why. She paid attention to pricing, presentation, tone. When she cleaned offices, she listened to conversations about money, about contracts, about opportunities she never imagined existed. The world had rules she had never been taught. Now she was studying them. Still, progress was slow. One evening, a landlord threw her bucket of water onto the street after she failed to finish a job fast enough. "Useless woman," he shouted. "If you were smart, you wouldn't be here." Eric walked away with her head down, but her heart burned. That night she prayed not for rescue but for strength. Days later, fate returned quietly. Eric was helping Amina deliver clothes to a customer when she saw him again. Joseph Mwangi stood near a cafe arguing with a driver. His walking stick leaned against the wall. The driver stormed off, muttering insults. Eric hesitated, then approached. "Sir, do you need help?" Joseph looked surprised, then smiled slightly. "It seems I always do when you appear." She helped him sit. He winced. "My leg," he explained. "Old injury." Eric fetched water without being asked. She didn't flatter him. She didn't beg. She simply helped. Joseph watched her carefully. "You don't ask many questions," he said. "I learned not to," she replied. That answer intrigued him. They talked again longer this time. Joseph spoke of business without details. Eric listened, absorbing words like investment, risk, growth. They sounded like a foreign language she wanted to learn. Before leaving, Joseph asked, "Would you like to work?" Eric blinked. "Work, yes," he said calmly. "Nothing special, just help at my office. Temporary." Suspicion flickered in her eyes. "I don't have qualifications." Joseph smiled. "Neither did I when I started." She thought of Beatrice's voice telling her she was useless. "I'll try," she said. The office was nothing like the places she cleaned. It was quiet, orderly, serious. Eric felt out of place in her worn clothes. The first day was humiliating. She spilled tea, misplaced files, struggled with simple instructions. People stared. At lunch, she nearly quit. Joseph stopped her at the door. "Why are you leaving?" "I'm embarrassing you," she said. "No," he replied. You're learning." Those words changed everything. Joseph did not coddle her. He corrected her sharply when she made mistakes. He assigned tasks beyond her comfort. He refused to explain things twice. But he also watched. He noticed how she stayed late to redo work, how she asked questions after everyone left, how she wrote notes in a small notebook she carried everywhere. Weeks passed. Eric improved. One evening, Joseph called her into his office. "Tell me," he said, "what do you see when you walk through the market?" Eric hesitated, then answered honestly. "Waste. Opportunity. People working hard with no structure." Joseph leaned back. "And what would you change?" She spoke carefully, unsure of herself. "Organization. Trust. Fair pricing." Joseph smiled. "You don't think like a cleaner," he said. "You think like a builder." Meanwhile, Beatrice's life was moving in the opposite direction of substance. His marriage to Lydia was loud and hollow. Expensive clothes, public displays, empty conversations. He borrowed money to impress people who barely respected him. Mama Ruth bragged about him to anyone who would listen. "My son married up," she said proudly. None of them noticed the cracks forming. Back in the slums, Eric's life was transforming quietly. She moved less like a victim now. Her posture changed, her eyes sharpened, her voice steadied. One night, as she returned home exhausted but fulfilled, Amina smiled at her. "You're different," she said. Eric nodded slowly. "I'm still scared," she admitted, but not lost. She didn't know it yet, but the woman who once stood silent in the rain was disappearing, and in her place something stronger was being formed. Eric Atiambo had never believed in sudden miracles. Life had taught her that nothing changed overnight. Everything was earned in small, painful steps. So when Joseph Mwangi began paying closer attention to her, she didn't mistake it for kindness. She treated it like a test she could still fail. Joseph's office was modest but powerful in its quiet authority. No flashy decorations, no loud promises, just files, numbers, and people who knew exactly why they were there. Eric absorbed everything like dry ground meeting rain. One morning, Joseph handed her a stack of documents thicker than usual. "Read these," he said, "and tell me what you think." Eric stared at the papers. All of them, yes. She took them home that night. Long after Amina fell asleep, Eric sat under the dim bulb reading slowly, sounding out unfamiliar terms, writing questions in the margins. Her eyes burned, but she didn't stop. The next day, Joseph listened as she spoke. She was nervous. Her voice trembled but she spoke. "There are gaps," she said. "People are losing money because they don't trust the middlemen. The system punishes the smallest workers." Joseph's eyebrows rose slightly. And if you fix trust," she continued, gaining confidence, "you fix everything else." Joseph leaned back. He didn't smile this time. He nodded. From that day, her role changed. She was no longer the woman Joseph gave a chance to. She became someone people noticed. Some employees resented her. Others ignored her. A few tried to intimidate her. One man laughed openly during a meeting. "What does she know?" he scoffed. "She used to clean floors." Eric lowered her eyes, not in shame but restraint. Joseph spoke instead. "And you used to be unemployed. Sit down." Silence fell. At night, Eric returned to the slums, still sleeping beside Amina, still fetching water, still counting coins. Her life had not improved materially yet, but something deeper was shifting. For the first time, she felt respected. One evening, as rain drummed softly on the roof, Amina asked, "Do you ever think about Beatrice?" Eric paused. "Yes," she admitted, "but not the way I used to." She no longer imagined begging him to understand her. She no longer replayed his insults, hoping they would hurt less. Now, when his face appeared in her mind, it came with distance, as if he belonged to a life that had already ended. Across town, Beatrice's new life was unraveling in slow motion. Lydia loved appearances. She loved restaurants, parties, loud laughter that hid emptiness. Beatrice spent money he didn't have trying to keep up. Debts piled quietly. One night, after an argument about bills, Lydia snapped. "You promised me more than this." Beatrice slammed the door and went drinking. He didn't notice how quickly admiration turned into disappointment. Back at Joseph's office, the pressure increased. Joseph called Eric in one afternoon. "I'm sending you to oversee a small project," he said. Her heart raced. "Me?" "Yes. What if I fail?" Joseph met her gaze. "Then you'll learn." The project was simple in theory, organizing a supply chain for small vendors. In reality, it was chaos, distrust, corruption, people unwilling to listen to a woman they considered beneath them. Eric returned home that night defeated. They won't listen, she told Amina. They laugh at me. Amina handed her a cup of water. Did you stop? Eric shook her head. Then you haven't failed. The next day, Eric went back. She listened more, spoke less, asked questions instead of giving instructions. Slowly, resistance softened. One vendor spoke up. You don't talk like the others, he said. You sound like us. That was the breakthrough. Weeks passed. The project stabilized. Profits rose. Trust followed. Joseph watched from a distance. One evening, he invited Eric to dinner, not as an employee, but as an equal. You remind me of someone, he said quietly, over food. Eric waited. Myself, he continued. Before success made people lie to me. He slid a folder across the table. What's this, she asked. An opportunity, Joseph replied. A partnership, not charity, not employment. Eric's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Numbers stared back at her, large numbers. I don't have money for this, she whispered. Joseph nodded. I know, but you have something better. What judgment? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I won't disappoint you, she said. Joseph smiled faintly. I know. That night, Eric walked home under a clear sky. For once, the city didn't feel hostile. It felt open. She stood outside the slum, breathing deeply. She was still poor, still tired, still uncertain. But she was no longer powerless, and somewhere inside her a quiet truth settled. The woman Beatrice threw away was already becoming someone he would never be able to reach again. Success did not arrive like a celebration. It arrived like pressure. After Joseph Mwangi offered Eric Adhiambo the partnership, nothing in her life became easier. In fact, everything became heavier. Expectations multiplied. Eyes followed her movements. Mistakes became expensive. The partnership meant responsibility. It meant that if she failed, it would not only be her shame, it would be Joseph's. The first weeks were brutal. Eric balanced her time between the office and the slum, refusing to move out despite Amina's concern. You can't keep living like this, Amina said one night as they shared a small bowl of rice. You're different now. Eric shook her head. Not yet. If I leave now, I'll forget why I started. Sleep became optional. Fear became familiar. At the office, Eric faced resistance that was no longer subtle. Some employees smiled to her face and undermined her in meetings. Others questioned Joseph's judgment openly. One afternoon, a senior manager confronted her. You're moving too fast, he said. People like you should be grateful, not ambitious. Eric met his eyes. Ambition is the only reason I'm here. The room went silent. Joseph watched carefully. He never intervened unless necessary. He wanted to see if she could stand alone. And she did, but not without falling. The first major deal Eric led collapsed. A partner backed out at the last moment. Money was lost, time wasted, trust shaken. The board demanded explanations. That night, Eric sat alone in Joseph's empty office, staring at the city lights. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened. This is where they'll say I didn't belong, she thought. Joseph entered quietly. Why are you still here? He asked. I was waiting, Eric replied honestly, for you to tell me I failed. Joseph pulled up a chair. Did you lie? No. Did you steal? No. Did you learn? Eric nodded slowly. Then you didn't fail, Joseph said. You paid tuition. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The next day she returned stronger. She restructured the plan. She renegotiated. She listened harder and spoke less. She learned when to be firm and when to bend. The second attempt worked, not perfectly, but well enough. Money came slowly at first, small profits, quiet growth. Eric still wore simple clothes, still took public transport, still avoided attention. Meanwhile, Beatrice Adhiambo was unraveling. His debts were no longer whispers. Creditors called daily. Lydia complained constantly. You're not the man you pretended to be, she snapped during one argument. Beatrice slapped the table. I gave you everything. No, she replied coldly. You gave me appearances. Mama Ruth noticed the tension. Marriage requires patience, she told Lydia. My son is under pressure, Lydia scoffed. Pressure or failure? Beatrice began drinking more, blaming others more. Thinking of Eric more, though he would never admit it. At night, fragments of memory haunted him. Her silence, her endurance, the way she had looked at him when he told her to leave, not angry, just empty. Back in Eric's world, another challenge arrived. Joseph fell ill. At first, it was small missed meetings, shorter days, then hospital visits, whispers. One afternoon, Joseph called Eric into his office. I need you to start leading without me, he said. Fear rose instantly. You'll be back, she said quickly. Joseph smiled faintly. Maybe, maybe not. She wanted to protest, to beg him not to say such things, but she remembered who she had become. I'm ready, she said instead. Joseph studied her carefully. You weren't born ready. You became ready. That's better. From that day on, Eric carried the weight alone. She made decisions that affected hundreds of people. She faced risks that kept her awake at night. She learned to hide fear behind calm. One evening, after closing a difficult deal, Eric returned home later than usual. Amina looked at her with concern. You're changing. Eric sat beside her. I'm growing. Amina nodded slowly. Just don't forget yourself. Eric thought of Beatrice, of how power had twisted him. I won't, she promised. Weeks later, Joseph suffered a serious setback. He withdrew completely. The company buzzed with uncertainty. Investors questioned leadership. Rivals circled. Eric stood in front of the board. Joseph trusted me, she said calmly, and I will justify that trust. They voted. Unanimous support. That night, Eric walked alone through the city. The same streets that once rejected her now opened before her. She paused at a traffic light. A luxury car passed splashing water near her feet, not on her, just close enough to remind her. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Because the woman standing there now could never be erased again. By the time Eric Adiambo truly realized she had power, she had already learned to fear it. Joseph Mwangi's absence created a vacuum, and vacuums never stayed empty for long. Competitors moved fast. Rumors spread faster. People who once ignored Eric now watched her every step, waiting, hoping for her to fall. The company was growing, but growth attracted predators. Eric felt it during meetings, the subtle challenges, the carefully worded doubts. You're bold, one investor said with a polite smile, but boldness without experience can be dangerous. Eric nodded calmly. That's why I listen before I decide. Behind closed doors, she worked relentlessly. She reviewed reports late into the night. She met small vendors personally, insisting on understanding the ground reality rather than relying on filtered presentations. One pattern troubled her. Middlemen were still profiting more than producers. The system had improved, but it was still unfair. Late one night, sitting alone with her notebook, Eric began sketching an idea. Not a minor adjustment. A restructuring. Direct networks. Transparent pricing. Digital records that reduced manipulation. It was risky, expensive, revolutionary, and it would anger powerful people. The next day, she presented it to the senior team. Silence followed, then laughter. This is unrealistic, one executive said. You'll collapse the system, another warned. A woman with theories, someone muttered under their breath. Eric didn't raise her voice. This system was built to benefit a few, she said steadily. I'm proposing one that benefits many. They warned her again. She listened. Then she made the decision. We move forward. The backlash was immediate. Suppliers threatened to leave. Partners delayed payments. The press began questioning her leadership. Headlines shifted from rising star to reckless risk-taker. At night, doubt crept in. What if they're right? What if this is where I fail? She thought of Beatrice, how fear of judgment had ruled his life. She refused to let it rule hers. Meanwhile, Beatrice Adiambo's life was collapsing in ways he could no longer hide. Lydia stopped pretending. She criticized openly now. You're always stressed, she snapped one morning, always blaming someone else. Beatrice slammed his phone down. Do you think it's easy being a man? No, she replied coldly. But I think it's easy being dishonest. She packed a bag that night and left. Mama Ruth tried to intervene. A woman must endure, she scolded Lydia. Lydia laughed bitterly. I endured enough. Beatrice was alone again. That loneliness burned his pride more than poverty ever could. Back at the company, Eric's gamble reached its tipping point. A key supplier pulled out. Production halted. Employees whispered. Investors panicked. The board demanded an emergency meeting. As Eric stood before them, she felt the weight of every past version of herself. The discarded wife, the homeless woman, the cleaner, no one noticed. She spoke anyway. This is the moment, she said, when we choose who we are. They argued for hours. Finally, the vote was called. The result was split. The decision rested on one person, Nathan Mwangi, Joseph's son, who had recently joined as a legal advisor. Nathan studied Eric carefully. If this fails, he said, you lose everything. Eric met his gaze. If it succeeds, thousands gain dignity. Nathan nodded once. Proceed. The weeks that followed were chaos. Systems crashed. Mistakes were made. Eric took responsibility publicly and privately. She apologized when necessary. She fired those who sabotaged quietly. Slowly, painfully, the system stabilized. Then something unexpected happened. Vendors began speaking. "Payment is fair now," one said. We can plan another shared." Someone finally listens. Trust returned. Then loyalty. Profit followed. The press changed its tone overnight. Visionary leadership. Breaking barriers. The woman who rewrote the rules. Eric read none of it. She was too busy working. Months later, Joseph returned, briefly thinner but smiling. "I heard," he said quietly. "You shook the table." Eric smiled softly. "I almost broke it," Joseph chuckled. "Good. Weak tables deserve to break." That evening, Eric stood on the balcony of the office building, watching the city lights. She remembered the nights she had slept hungry, wondering if life would ever change. It had, but not the way she imagined. She hadn't escaped struggle. She had learned to command it, and somewhere across the city, Beatrice Adiambo stared at a television screen displaying her face. He didn't recognize the woman she had become, but he felt something heavy in his chest. Regret. Eric Adiambo did not wake up one morning and decide she was rich. Wealth arrived quietly, like a shadow that lengthened without asking permission. The numbers on paper grew larger, the accounts expanded, investors spoke her name with caution and respect. Yet Eric's daily routine barely changed. She still woke early. She still reviewed reports herself. She still walked through markets without announcing who she was. Power had taught her discretion. One afternoon, after a long meeting, her assistant, new, young, and visibly nervous, hesitated at the door. "Madam Eric," she said carefully. The finance team confirmed it. Confirmed what Eric asked without looking up. "You've crossed the threshold. By valuation, you're officially a billionaire." The word hung in the air, heavy and unreal. Eric finally looked up. She expected to feel something dramatic, joy, triumph, even revenge. Instead, she felt stillness, the kind that comes after surviving a storm. "Thank you," she said simply. "Please schedule the next meeting." When the door closed, she leaned back and closed her eyes. A memory surfaced uninvited. Rain, a suitcase, Beatrice's voice saying leave. She opened her eyes again. That woman felt like someone she had once known and buried. Later that week, Eric attended a public business forum. Not as a speaker, just an observer. She sat quietly in the back, dressed simply, her hair pulled back, no jewelry, announcing her status. Across the hall, laughter erupted. Beatrice Adiambo walked in, arm-linked with Lydia. He wore a sharp suit that hid desperation well. Lydia looked bored already, scanning the room for attention. Eric noticed him instantly. He did not notice her. She watched him greet people, loudly exaggerating his success, pretending confidence he no longer felt. She saw the cracks others missed, the forced smile, the careful avoidance of certain faces. A strange calm settled over her. No anger, no longing, just distance. As Beatrice passed her row, his eyes skimmed over her and moved on. To him, she was invisible. Just another woman sitting quietly in the back. Eric felt no urge to correct him. That night, she returned home, not to the slum, but to a modest apartment she had purchased quietly months earlier. Amina had insisted she move. "You can't save the world if you collapse," Amina had said. Eric had agreed reluctantly. As she prepared dinner, Amina studied her. "You saw him, didn't you?" Eric nodded, and Amina pressed. "There was nothing there," Eric replied honestly. "No pain, no victory, just emptiness." Amina smiled. "That's when you know you're free." But freedom came with new burdens. The more visible Eric's success became, the more resistance followed. Old partners resurfaced with entitlement. Distant relatives suddenly remembered her existence. People spoke of loyalty they never showed. One man arrived unannounced at her office. "I supported you from the beginning," he claimed. Eric reviewed records calmly. "No, you didn't." His smile faded. "You should be grateful," he warned. "People like us made people like you." Eric met his gaze. "People like me made people like me." Security escorted him out. That same week, the press dug into her past. Headlines speculated. Where did she come from? Who was her husband? Why did he disappear from her story? Eric refused interviews. She wasn't ashamed, but she wasn't interested in spectacle. Meanwhile, Beatrice's curiosity had turned into obsession. He couldn't escape her face. Billboards, articles, television panels praising a woman named Eric Adiambo, self-made, disciplined visionary. The name nagged at him. One night, after too much drink, he said it aloud. "Eric Adiambo." Lydia glanced up from her phone. "What nothing?" he muttered. But doubt crept in. Could it be number impossible? Eric was weak. Eric was small. Eric would never. He stopped himself. The image of the woman he splashed with mud days earlier flashed in his mind. Her silence, her posture, her eyes. For the first time, unease replaced arrogance. Back in her world, Eric faced a decision that tested her values more than any financial risk. A massive expansion opportunity emerged, international, lucrative, fast. But it required cutting ties with small vendors, the very people she had built her system to protect. Her team pushed hard. This is how billionaires think, one advisor said. You can't save everyone. Eric listened, then asked one question. Who do we become if we forget why we started? The room fell silent. She rejected the deal. Investors panicked. Analysts criticized her emotional leadership. Eric didn't respond. Instead, she funded education programs for women. She supported small traders. She built quietly, steadily, intentionally. Her wealth grew slower but stronger. One evening, as Eric stood alone in her office overlooking the city, she reflected on the irony. Beatrice had chased wealth to feel powerful. She had found power by surviving without it. The rain began again, soft against the glass. Eric smiled faintly. The storm that once destroyed her now obeyed her silence. And soon, very soon, the past would come knocking, desperate for answers it no longer deserved. Power attracts enemies long before it attracts peace. Eric Adhiambo learned that lesson the hard way. The moment her company refused the massive international expansion, the atmosphere shifted, smiles became tight, meetings became colder. The same investors who once praised her vision now whispered about her emotions. They didn't attack her directly. They waited. The first strike came quietly, an audit request. Routine on the surface, aggressive in tone. Then came delays from banks that had never hesitated before. A shipment went missing. A contract vanished from the system. Eric noticed the pattern immediately. This isn't coincidence, she told Nathan Mwangi during a late-night meeting. Nathan nodded, his jaw tight. Someone is testing your foundation. The problem wasn't money. The problem was reputation. In business, doubt could destroy faster than loss. Then Joseph Mwangi died. The news arrived on a calm morning, wrapped in polite words that couldn't soften the blow. Eric sat in her office long after everyone left, staring at the empty chair across from her desk. Joseph had been more than a mentor. He had been proof that the world still recognized integrity. Now he was gone. At the funeral, powerful figures gathered. Faces Eric had seen only in boardrooms now bowed their heads respectfully. Some offered condolences. Others studied her closely, measuring her strength without Joseph's shadow. She felt it clearly. Now we see what she's made of. Joseph's will named no successor publicly, but everyone knew the truth. Eric was alone now. Within weeks, the attacks intensified. A former partner filed a lawsuit accusing the company of breach and mismanagement. The press devoured it eagerly. Billionaire built on lies. Was Eric Adhiambo just lucky? Employees grew nervous. Vendors called in fear. Trust, the thing Eric had spent years building, began to tremble. At night, doubt returned like an old enemy. She remembered sleeping hungry, being thrown out, standing in the rain. Is this where it ends, she wondered. Nathan worked tirelessly, gathering documents, tracking inconsistencies. They're coordinating, he said grimly. They think you'll settle to protect your image. Eric shook her head. If I settle, they'll never stop. The board pressured her privately. Think strategically, one member urged. You've already won. Why fight? Eric met his gaze calmly. Because if I don't, I lose everything I stand for. The legal battle exploded publicly. Court dates, media coverage, protesters outside the building, some paid, some confused. Eric refused to hide. She attended hearings quietly, dressed simply, her expression unreadable. Cameras flashed, questions flew. She answered none. Meanwhile, Beatrice Adhiambo watched everything unfold from a distance. He recognized the name now. There was no doubt left. Eric, his Eric, the woman he humiliated, the woman he threw out like trash. She was the billionaire on every screen. Shock hit him first, then disbelief, then something darker. She should have told me, he thought bitterly. She should have come back. That night he drank alone. Lydia was long gone. Mama Ruth's calls went unanswered. For the first time in his life, Beatrice felt small. Back in Eric's world, the lawsuit reached its peak. Nathan laid the evidence out carefully. They forged documents, he explained. They manipulated timelines. We can prove it, but it will get ugly. Eric exhaled slowly. Truth usually is. The court session that followed was brutal. The opposing lawyer spoke confidently, painting Eric as an opportunist who exploited Joseph's illness. Murmurs filled the room. Eric listened without reaction. Then Nathan stood. Piece by piece, he dismantled the narrative. Emails, signed records, witness testimonies from small vendors whose lives had improved because of Eric's policies. The judge leaned forward. The room fell silent. When the ruling came, it was decisive. Case dismissed. Damages awarded to Eric's company. The press reversed course overnight. False accusations exposed. Eric Adhiambo clears her name. But victory didn't bring celebration. Eric returned to her office and sat alone. She felt tired, not physically, but spiritually. Power had cost her something she couldn't yet name. Amina visited that evening. "You won," she said softly. Eric nodded. "I survived." Amina smiled sadly. "That's what winning looks like sometimes." Across the city, Beatrice stared at his phone, reading the same headlines again and again. She had won, and he had lost more than money, more than pride. He had lost the right to speak to her at all. For the first time, fear replaced arrogance. Because he knew now, the woman he once splashed with mud was untouchable. After the court ruling, the city treated Eric Adhiambo differently. Doors opened before she knocked. Invitations arrived daily. People who once doubted her now spoke her name with rehearsed admiration. The company's valuation surged, not just because of profit, but because Eric had proven something rarer than wealth. She could not be broken. Yet victory brought a strange quiet. The adrenaline faded, the noise settled. And in that stillness, Eric felt the weight of everything she had carried. She refused the celebration the board planned. No speeches, she said, no parties. Instead, she returned to work. The first thing she did was visit the vendors, the women and men who had testified in court. She listened to their stories, thanked them personally, and promised something she had never promised before. Stability, she said, not charity. They believed her. Nathan Wangi watched her carefully during those weeks. "You know," he said one evening, "most people would enjoy this moment." Eric smiled faintly. "I did, quietly. Then I moved on." Her reputation solidified. Media outlets stopped chasing scandal and started chasing insight. Analysts quoted her decisions as case studies. Young women wrote letters, long, trembling letters, describing how seeing her stand in court had changed something inside them. Eric read every one. She didn't respond publicly. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, the company faced its next test: consolidation. Rivals approached with offers, buyouts, mergers, partnerships that promised speed and scale. Some offers were tempting, very tempting. One deal in particular would place Eric among the most powerful business figures on the continent overnight. The condition was simple. She would step aside. Strategic leadership transition, they called it. Eric listened, asked questions, requested data. Then she declined. Why, one negotiator asked, baffled. "You'd still be rich. You'd still be celebrated." Eric met his eyes. "But I wouldn't be responsible." They didn't understand the answer. That was fine. Her choice sent a clear message. She was not building something to sell. She was building something to last. Across town, Beatrice Adhiambo felt the aftershocks of her success in the most personal way. People stopped returning his calls. Old friends avoided his gaze. His name, once spoken with casual confidence, now sounded like a footnote. Someone asked him at a bar, "Weren't you married to her?" He laughed too loudly, briefly. Must be something the man added to lose a woman like that. The words struck deeper than any insult. Beatrice went home and sat in the dark, scrolling through articles about Eric. He studied her photos, searching for the woman he remembered. She wasn't there. In her place stood someone composed, distant, unreachably calm. He told himself he should apologize. He rehearsed speeches he would never deliver. He imagined explanations that made him look less cruel. None of them sounded true. Back in Eric's world, the company prepared for its annual summit, a gathering of partners, investors, and industry leaders. It would be the first time Eric appeared publicly since the lawsuit. Nathan urged caution. "They'll watch everything." Eric nodded. "So will I." On the day of the summit, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Cameras lined the entrance. Voices hushed as Eric arrived. No grand entrance, no spectacle, just presence. She spoke briefly. "Growth," she said, "is not about speed. It's about direction. We choose ours." Applause followed, not explosive but sincere. As the event continued, Eric moved through the crowd calmly. She greeted familiar faces, avoided old traps, smiled when appropriate. Then she saw him. Beatrice stood near the back, awkward, out of place. His suit was sharp, but his posture betrayed him. He hesitated when their eyes met. For a moment the room faded. Eric remembered rain on her skin, mud in her mouth, laughter from a car speeding away. She felt nothing now. Beatrice took a step forward, then another. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Eric inclined her head politely, the way one does to a stranger. "Excuse me," she said, and walked past. The encounter lasted less than 5 seconds. It shattered him. Later that night, Eric stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. Lights pulsed below like distant stars. Amina joined her, handing her a glass of water. "You saw him," Amina said softly. "Yes." And Eric exhaled. "I realized something. What I don't need closure from him," she replied. "I already closed that door." Amina smiled. "Then you're truly done." As the year drew to a close, Eric announced a quiet initiative funding for women-led cooperatives, legal education programs, and transparent market platforms. She avoided headlines. She avoided praise. She focused on systems, because systems outlived people, and as she built, the world adjusted around her. Beatrice watched from the sidelines, shrinking into a past he could no longer rewrite. Mama Ruth stopped boasting. Lydia never returned. His pride, once loud, learned silence. Eric did not notice. She had reached a place where the past no longer demanded her attention. And yet fate was not finished. Because soon, very soon, the rain would return, and with it, the moment when humiliation would meet truth in full daylight. The rain returned on a morning that looked ordinary enough. Gray clouds hung low over the city, the kind that promised trouble without urgency. Eric Adiambo left her apartment early, choosing to walk a short distance before her driver arrived. She liked the rhythm of the streets at that hour, vendors setting up buses, coughing awake the quiet courage of people starting again. She wore a simple coat, no jewelry, no announcement of who she was. At an intersection near a construction site, traffic slowed. Puddles gathered thick and brown along the curb. Eric paused, watching for a safe moment to cross. That was when the engine revved. A sleek black car surged forward from behind the line of traffic. The driver saw her. There was time to slow, time to steer away. Instead, the car swerved sharply toward the puddle. Mud exploded upward, heavy and violent. It slapped against Eric's coat, her face, her hair. The impact knocked the breath from her chest. Cold seeped into her skin. Laughter burst from the open window. "Watch where you're going," a woman's voice mocked. The car did not stop. It sped away, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Eric stood frozen, heart-pounding, mud dripping from her eyelashes. The street seemed to hold its breath. A few people stared. No one moved. Then a passerby rushed toward her. "Are you okay?" Eric nodded slowly. She wiped her face with trembling hands. Across the intersection, the car stopped at a red light. Inside sat Beatrice Adiambo, hands tight on the steering wheel, adrenaline still buzzing. Beside him, Lydia laughed loudly, clapping once. "Did you see her?" Lydia said. She looked pathetic. Beatrice glanced in the mirror. For half a second, something tugged at his memory, the woman's posture, the stillness after humiliation. Then the light turned green. He drove on. Eric crossed the street, carefully ignoring the stares, ignoring the sting in her eyes. She reached the sidewalk and stopped beneath a small awning. Mud slid down her coat in thick lines. For a brief moment, the old feeling threatened to return. Not anger, not sadness, exposure. She closed her eyes and breathed. "This is not the same," she reminded herself. "I am not the same." Her phone vibrated. It was Caleb Otieno, her driver. "I'm 2 minutes away, madam," he said, then paused. "Are you all right?" Eric looked down at her coat, then up at the rain. "Yes," she replied. "I am." When Caleb arrived, his eyes widened. "Who did this?" he demanded. Eric stepped into the car. "It doesn't matter," but Caleb saw the direction the car had gone. He memorized it without a word. At the office, whispers followed her. Someone had filmed the incident. The video spread quickly, short, blurry, cruel. Comments multiplied. That was unnecessary. Some people have no shame. Who even does that? Eric changed clothes, washed her face, and walked into a meeting 10 minutes early. She did not mention the incident. She did not ask for sympathy. But she noticed something new in the room. Silence. People watched her differently now, not with pity, but with respect sharpened by outrage. Later that day, Caleb knocked softly on her door. "I found the car," he said quietly. "The plate, the driver." Eric looked up. "Who?" Caleb hesitated. "Beatrice Adiambo." The name landed without force. Eric nodded once. Thank you. Caleb waited, uncertain. Do you want me to? No, Eric said gently. Not yet. Across the city, Beatrice's laughter faded quickly. By afternoon, his phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from acquaintances, from colleagues, from numbers he didn't recognize. Is this you? You're trending? People are angry. He opened social media and felt his stomach drop. The video had been slowed, zoomed, reposted. Someone had identified the car. Someone else had identified him. Lydia stormed into the room, furious. Why is everyone calling me? Beatrice stared at the screen. The woman in the video, mud-soaked silent, suddenly looked familiar in a way that terrified him. He replayed it. Her eyes. His chest tightened. No, he whispered. Lydia scoffed. It's just some woman. People are too sensitive. But Beatrice couldn't shake the feeling. By evening, the story shifted. A news outlet published a follow-up. Woman in viral mud splash incident identified as billionaire Eric Adhiambo. Beatrice's phone slipped from his hand. Lydia's laughter died instantly, what she whispered, reading the headline again. Beatrice sat down hard, blood roaring in his ears. The room spun. Eric, the woman he humiliated again, only this time the world was watching. Across town, Eric watched the same news quietly from her office. Nathan Mwangi stood beside her, jaw clenched. This will explode, he said. Do you want to respond? Eric considered it. Images from the past flashed through her mind. Rain, a suitcase, a voice telling her to leave. She shook her head. Let it breathe, she said. Truth doesn't need rushing. Nathan nodded slowly. By nightfall, public outrage grew. Sponsors withdrew from events Beatrice was scheduled to attend. His employer called for an urgent discussion. Friends stopped defending him. Lydia packed a bag in silence. I didn't sign up for this, she said flatly. Beatrice didn't answer. He sat alone, staring at the door long after she left. For the first time, he understood something he had never learned. Humiliation, when returned by fate, arrives without mercy, and this time there would be no rain to hide behind. By morning, the city had chosen a side. Eric Adhiambo's name filled every channel. Radio hosts debating morality, television panels replaying the slowed footage frame by frame, social feeds dissecting Beatrice Adhiambo's smirk as the car splashed through the puddle. The story was no longer about mud. It was about power and how it was used. Eric woke early as always. She drank water, reviewed the day's schedule, and said nothing about the storm outside her door. Caleb waited quietly in the living room, his posture protective but controlled. Madam, he said carefully, security recommends you postpone public appearances. Eric nodded. Postpone, yes. Hide, no. At the office, Nathan Mwangi laid out the facts with a lawyer's precision. Beatrice's employer has requested a meeting with him. Sponsors are withdrawing. The board of the transport firm he advises is reviewing conduct. The pressure is accelerating. Eric listened without interruption. When he finished, she asked only one question. Has he reached out? Not yet, Nathan replied, but he will. Across town, Beatrice's world was collapsing in daylight. He arrived at his office to find the front desk empty. An email waited in his inbox, brief, formal, devastating. Administrative leave effective immediately. He sat down slowly, staring at the words as if they might change. They didn't. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother, Beatrice. Mama Ruth said, voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. What is this nonsense on the news? He swallowed. It's complicated. People are laughing at us, she snapped. At our family. He closed his eyes. I know. What did you do? She demanded. He didn't answer. At noon, a message arrived from an unfamiliar number. We should talk. No signature, no greeting. Beatrice knew exactly who it was from. His hands shook as he typed and deleted replies. Apologies sounded hollow. Explanations sounded weak. Finally, he sent one line. Please. The response came minutes later. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. Relief and dread collided in his chest. He spent the night rehearsing words he had avoided for years. At exactly 10 the next morning, Beatrice arrived at Eric's building. Security recognized him immediately. Cameras followed his steps through the lobby. Whispers rippled as he passed. The man who once commanded rooms now moved like a guest who knew he had overstayed his welcome. Eric waited in her office, composed, hands folded. She wore a simple dress, neutral colors, no symbols of wealth, no armor. When Beatrice entered, the air shifted. For a moment, neither spoke. He looked older than she remembered, smaller. The confidence that once filled his voice had drained away, leaving behind a tightness around the eyes. "Eric," he said finally, voice hoarse. She raised a hand gently. "Sit." He obeyed. The silence stretched. It was not awkward. It was intentional. "I saw the video," he began, then stopped. I was there. "I didn't know it was you." Eric's gaze remained steady. "You didn't slow down." He flinched. "I didn't think. That," she replied calmly, "has always been your problem." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The word fell flat between them. "Are you?" she asked. "Or are you afraid?" His mouth opened, closed. He exhaled. "Both." She nodded. "That's honest." He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "I never imagined this. I never imagined you this." She tilted her head slightly. "What did you imagine?" He hesitated. "I thought you'd fade." The truth landed like a quiet verdict. Eric didn't react. She had already grieved that assumption years ago. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," she said. "The world did that on its own." Tears welled in his eyes. He blinked them back, ashamed. "What do you want from me?" Eric considered the question carefully. "I want you to listen," she said, "without defending yourself." He nodded. "When you told me to leave," she continued, "you didn't just end a marriage. You erased a person. You decided my worth based on convenience." She paused, letting the words breathe. "When you splashed that mud, you repeated the same choice." He bowed his head. "I know. I don't want your apology," she said. "I want accountability." He looked up, startled. "What does that mean?" "It means you tell the truth," she replied, publicly, without excuses. His face drained of color. "You want me to destroy myself?" Eric shook her head. "No, you already did that. I want you to stop hiding." The room fell silent again. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it." "Good," she said. "And then this ends." He stood slowly, unsure. "You're letting me go?" Eric met his eyes. "I let you go the day I walked into the rain. This is just the paperwork." As he turned to leave, his voice broke. "Eric, I lost you." She considered him for a long moment. "No," she said softly. "You never had me." That afternoon, Beatrice stood before cameras and spoke words he had avoided his entire life. He admitted cruelty. He admitted arrogance. He admitted intent. The city listened. Some forgave. Many didn't. Eric watched none of it. She closed her laptop and looked out at the skyline. The storm that had chased her for years finally passed, leaving the air clear and sharp. Tomorrow there would be consequences, for him, for her. But tonight there was peace. The confession did not end the noise. It transformed it. Beatrice Adhiambo's words played on every screen, his voice unsteady, his posture stripped of bravado, his admission unmistakable. He spoke of intent, of arrogance, of a belief that power gave permission. The city reacted the way cities do when truth arrives late, loudly, unevenly, without mercy. Some called it courage. Most called it too little too late. By evening, consequences followed with clinical precision. His employer terminated his contract. A civic organization withdrew an award he had once flaunted. Invitations vanished. Friends stopped answering. Mama Ruth's pride curdled into quiet shame. At home, Beatrice sat alone. The television muted his reflection, faintly visible in the dark screen. He felt emptied of excuses, of defense, of the certainty he once used to move through the world. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be seen without control. Across the city, Eric Adhiambo felt none of it as triumph. She spent the day as she always did, meetings, calls, documents, decisions that affected people who would never know her name. Nathan Wangi stopped by late in the afternoon holding a thin folder. "The public response is stabilizing," he said. "Your silence helped." Eric nodded. "Noise burns itself out." Nathan hesitated. "Some groups want you to speak about forgiveness, about women, about power." Eric considered that. Later she said, "Right now, systems need attention." That night, Amina visited. They sat in the kitchen sharing tea, the old comfort between them intact. "You didn't watch," Amina said, not as a question. "No." Amina smiled softly. "That's growth." Eric leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. It's peace. But peace, she knew, was not the same as forgetting. The next days unfolded like a controlled descent for Beatrice. He sold his car to cover immediate debts. Creditors negotiated from positions that had once been his. Lydia's absence became permanent, her silence the loudest statement of all. Mama Ruth came to see him one morning, her steps slower, her voice uncertain. "They say you apologized," she said, sitting carefully. He nodded. "I did." She looked around the room, taking in the changes, the emptiness where pride used to sit. "Why didn't you listen before?" Beatrice stared at his hands, because listening would have required humility. Mama Ruth said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "I was wrong about her." He looked up, startled. "I was wrong," she repeated, "and I taught you that wrongness." The words landed with a weight heavier than accusation. Meanwhile, Eric faced a different reckoning. Letters arrived, handwritten, emailed, forwarded through intermediaries. Women describing marriages that crushed them. Men confessing moments of cruelty they wished they could undo. Young girls asking how to become strong without becoming hard. Eric read them slowly. She did not rush replies. One letter in particular stayed with her. It was short. "I'm learning to leave before I disappear." "Thank you." Eric placed it in a drawer. At the company, she convened a small meeting with leaders she trusted. No cameras, no press. "We will formalize our ethics charter," she said. "Clear conduct standards, real consequences." One executive frowned. "That will limit us." Eric met his gaze. "It will define us." They agreed. Across town, Beatrice received a final notice, formal, impersonal. A civil penalty related to the incident, a required community program focused on public conduct and accountability. He accepted it without protest. On his first day at the program, he arrived early and sat in the back. The facilitator spoke plainly. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about repair." Beatrice listened. He took notes. He did not speak until asked. When he did, his voice was steady. "I'm here to learn how to stop harming people when I feel powerful." The room was quiet. No one applauded. No one mocked him. Learning, he realized, was lonelier than pride. Weeks passed. The city moved on as cities do. New scandals replaced old ones. Eric's name returned to its usual place, respected but no longer weaponized. Her initiatives advanced. Markets stabilized. The work continued. One afternoon, Eric visited a women-led cooperative on the city's edge. She arrived without entourage, sat on plastic chairs, listened to concerns about supply costs and childcare. She took notes herself. A young woman asked hesitantly, "Did it hurt?" "What happened to you?" Eric met her eyes. "Yes," she said, "and it taught me what not to become." On her way back, rain began to fall again, light this time, almost gentle. Eric watched it trace the window, a familiar sound without the sting. At home that evening, she opened her email and found a single message forwarded by Nathan. From Beatrice Adiambo. She paused before opening it. The message was brief. "I won't ask for anything. I wanted to say I'm learning, that's all. No excuses, no plea." Eric closed the message and did not reply, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a gift owed. It was a choice earned within oneself. As the weeks turned into months, Beatrice completed his program quietly. He found work far from the spotlight, modest and anonymous. He spoke less. He listened more. The city did not welcome him back with open arms, but it did not chase him either. That was the cost. Eric continued building methodically, intentionally. She expanded education funding. She mentored leaders who valued restraint over dominance. She chose partners who asked better questions, not bigger ones. One evening, standing on her balcony, Amina beside her, Eric watched the city glow. "You ever think about how close you came to disappearing?" Amina asked. Eric nodded. "Every day." And I choose presence," she replied, "on my terms." Below them, traffic moved steadily through wet streets. No one swerved. No one laughed. The past had not been erased. It had been answered. Time did what outrage never could. It settled the dust. Months passed and the city found a new rhythm. Headlines shifted. Voices moved on. What remained were outcomes, quiet, irreversible, honest. For Eric Adiambo, the work deepened. She formalized the ethics charter she had promised, embedding accountability into contracts, incentives, and leadership reviews. It was not glamorous. It did not trend. But it changed behavior. At a quarterly review, an executive challenged her. "These standards will slow us down," he argued. "Competitors won't play fair." Eric listened without interruption. Then she replied calmly, "We don't compete on shortcuts. We compete on trust." The room fell quiet. The vote passed. She expanded the cooperative program, pairing capital with training and legal support. She insisted on transparency not just in finances but in decision-making. When mistakes happened, they were addressed publicly, not buried. "You're too hard on yourself," Nathan Wangi said once, half smiling. Eric shook her head. "I'm careful with power. It doesn't forgive carelessness." Across the city, Beatrice Adiambo learned what careful living required. He kept his head down. He showed up early to work. He did not talk about his past unless asked, and even then he chose his words sparingly. The program he completed led to volunteer service with traffic safety campaigns. The irony was not lost on him. One afternoon, a facilitator asked him to share a lesson. Beatrice took a breath. "Power isn't loud," he said. "It's what you do when you think no one is watching." No one applauded. That was fine. He moved into a smaller apartment. He sold the last reminder of his former life, a watch he once loved, for how it made others look at him. He kept the receipt folded in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Mama Ruth visited less often. When she did, their conversations were quieter. "I see her sometimes," Mama Ruth admitted one evening, staring out the window. "On the news. She speaks gently." Beatrice nodded. "She always did." Mama Ruth swallowed. "We were wrong." Beatrice didn't argue. There was nothing left to defend. Meanwhile, Eric faced a choice that tested her restraint. A major international consortium returned with a revised offer. Cleaner terms, shared governance, long-term alignment. It would expand her systems beyond borders. The proposal came with one condition. They wanted a symbolic reconciliation event, a public moment, closure for the cameras. Eric read the document twice, then set it aside. She called Amina. "They want a story," Eric said, "a picture. And you," Amina asked, "I want results." Eric declined the condition and accepted the partnership without spectacle. It surprised them and set a precedent. At a community forum weeks later, a young woman raised her hand. "People say you're too forgiving," she said, "that you let him go." Eric met her gaze. "I didn't let him go. I let myself go." The woman nodded, understanding more than words could explain. As the year turned, Eric quietly restructured her personal life. She simplified schedules. She blocked evenings for rest. She reconnected with people she had lost during survival mode, teachers, neighbors, distant relatives who had loved her without conditions. She visited the church steps where she had once slept. The steps were newly painted now, the doors open. She sat for a moment, not to mourn, but to acknowledge the distance traveled. Rain began to fall, soft, unthreatening. She smiled. Across town, Beatrice stood at a bus stop watching the same rain darken the pavement. A woman beside him struggled with a bag. He offered help without announcement. She accepted with a nod. It was small. It mattered. Weeks later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned Eric in passing. "She's opening another training center," they said. Beatrice nodded. "She builds." That was all. The city, for its part, learned something too. That humiliation, when exposed, does not demand vengeance to become justice. That accountability, when accepted, reshapes more than punishment ever could. That power, when held by the careful, heals more than it harms. On a clear evening, Eric stood at her window, city lights blinking awake. Nathan called to confirm the final signatures on a long-term agreement. "Done," he said. "It's solid." Eric exhaled. "Good." She poured herself water and turned off the lights. No cameras, no applause, just quiet competence. The storm that once defined her had passed. What remained was direction. The city no longer whispered Eric Adiambo's name with surprise. It spoke it with certainty. Years of deliberate choices had reshaped more than markets, they had reshaped expectations. People no longer asked how she survived what she did. They asked what came next. Eric answered with work. The final expansion phase of her cooperative network launched quietly, just as she preferred. Training centers opened in neighborhoods once dismissed as unprofitable. Women who had never held formal contracts now reviewed balance sheets with confidence. Young men learned that leadership was measured not by dominance, but by responsibility. At the opening of one center, a reporter tried to provoke her. "Do you believe in karma?" he asked, microphone poised. Eric smiled gently. "I believe in consequences," she replied, "and in choice." The reporter tried again. "Do you regret not responding publicly when you were humiliated?" Eric paused, thoughtful. "No. Silence isn't weakness when it's chosen." The question faded. The work remained. That afternoon, Eric walked alone through a market she had helped stabilize years earlier. Vendors greeted her warmly, not with awe but familiarity. Children ran past laughing. The air smelled of spices and rain-soaked earth. She remembered the first time she had walked these streets with empty pockets and a heavy heart. She remembered wondering if she would disappear unnoticed. She hadn't. At home that evening, Amina cooked while Eric set the table. Their routine had returned to something simple, almost ordinary by design. "You've done what you said you would," Amina said, placing plates down. "You never became bitter." Eric considered that. "I came close," she admitted, "but bitterness would have kept me tied to the past." Amina raised her glass, to choosing freedom. They ate quietly, content. Across the city, Beatrice Adiambo lived a life that no longer chased validation. He worked, volunteered, and spent evenings reading instead of replaying old glories. The city did not celebrate his reform, but it acknowledged his consistency. One evening, while organizing materials for a safety workshop, a young man asked him, "Do you think people can really change?" Beatrice thought carefully. "Only if they stop protecting who they were." The young man nodded, absorbing the answer. Beatrice never contacted Eric again. He didn't need to. The distance between them was no longer painful, it was appropriate. On a quiet morning, Eric received a handwritten note delivered to her office. "No return address. Because you didn't become what hurt you, my daughter stayed. Thank you." Eric folded the note and placed it beside the letter she had saved long ago. "I'm learning to leave before I disappear." She stood by the window, watching the city wake up. Rain clouds gathered in the distance, but they didn't worry her anymore. Rain was just rain now, not a threat, not a symbol. Later that day, she addressed a small group of young leaders, not from a stage, but seated among them. "You will be tested," she said calmly. "Not by failure, but by power. Pay attention to who you become when you think you're untouchable." They listened. As evening settled, Eric returned to her balcony. The city lights flickered on, steady and alive. She breathed deeply, grounded in the present. Her life no longer revolved around proving anything. She had already answered the only question that mattered. Who am I when no one is watching? The answer had carried her through rain, through silence, through power, and into peace. And somewhere in the city below, people crossed streets without fear of being unseen. That was enough. Life doesn't always punish cruelty immediately. Sometimes it lets it grow comfortable first. This story reminds us that the most dangerous form of harm is not loud violence, but quiet humiliation, the kind that tells someone they are small, invisible, disposable. Eric Adiambo was not destroyed by poverty or betrayal. She was tested by power, first by lacking it, and later by holding it. Her victory was not becoming richer than her ex-husband. Her victory was refusing to become him. When she was humiliated, she did not rush to revenge. When she gained power, she did not use it to crush. Instead, she chose restraint, accountability, and purpose, and that choice changed more lives than any public punishment ever could. This is the deeper lesson: karma is not always about suffering. Sometimes karma is being forced to watch the person you tried to erase live fully without you. And sometimes grace is walking away without needing an apology. If you've ever been disrespected, overlooked, or made to feel small, remember this. Your worth is not proven by how loudly you fight back, but by how intentionally you build forward. Before you leave, share your thoughts with us in the comments. Have you ever chosen silence over revenge? What part of this story moved you the most? And if stories about real-life karma, healing, and quiet strength speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.